Hey everyone, welcome back. So President Donald Trump just confirmed $2,000 stimulus checks to Americans and actually gave a firm deadline on when Americans can expect to receive this money. So in today's video, we are going to be covering everything that you need to know. But before we go ahead and dive into for today, if you would like to receive up to $200 in free stock or $200 in free cash, in a pinned comment below, I will be leaving a link to Robinhood. All you have to do is once you click on that link is just sign up for a free account and then simply link your bank account. You do not even have to make an opening deposit. At that point in time, Robinhood will be sending you one free stock worth all the way up to $200. Okay, so President Donald Trump has now doubled down on the $2,000 stimulus checks and even went as far as to actually issue a deadline on when all Americans can expect to receive these checks. This really pretty much cements how sure he is that these things are actually going to pass through Congress, or he's going to figure out some way to make this happen, because to promise this, not just once, but twice and even three times, he is really, laying it down, saying that this is for sure pretty much going to happen, and this is when you can expect to receive these checks. So according to Fortune, President Donald Trump promised on Monday that his administration will begin issuing $2,000 quote tariff dividend checks to Americans around the middle of 2026, the most specific timetable he has offered yet on a proposal that can't seem to find a home within a campaign-esque promise, economic argument, and political provocation. And this is actually a pretty much the best time possible that, not only the Trump administration, but also for Republicans, for them to be able to deliver these checks. Because when exactly is mid-2026? Well, mid-2026 is going to be somewhere around June, July, or August. And also, what other important event do we have coming up around those dates? Well, we actually have an election, a very important midterm election, which is going to give us the outcome of who is going to be controlling the House and perhaps even the Senate come 2027 and 2028. If Democrats are able to retake the House and possibly or even the Senate, that pretty much makes the last 2 years of Trump's presidency pretty much a lame duck presidency, where he's not going to be able to get anything done. If Democrats if Democrats control the House or the Senate, they can pretty much strike down anything that Republicans want to get done. So for Trump, and especially Republicans, it's very important for them to maintain control of both the House and the Senate. So if Trump is able to sign checks into law, $2,000 just before the midterm election, that might actually give them a very good chance to maintain control of both the House and the Senate. Leave your thoughts and comments below. And they're going to here to say that, quote, we're going to be issuing dividends later on, somewhere prior to, probably the middle of next year. A little bit later than that, Trump told reporters in the Oval Office, according to Axios, the payments, he said, would go to, quote, individuals of moderate income, middle income. Now, the commitment marks an escalation from Trump's earlier vigor assertion that tariffs are generating enough money to fund direct payments to American households, but turning the idea into actual checks is far more complicated than his easygoing rhetoric suggests. So again, that is very much an important thing. Trump is doubling down. He's actually giving a direct timetable, because we've heard Trump say before, certain ideas, certain things, and those sort of disappear. But now he's actually coming out and giving a direct timetable, a deadline on when you can expect these checks. Again, the middle part of 2026. As far as those who are eligible, he's saying middle income. How high is middle income? Is it $100,000? Is it $200,000? Is it $300,000? We'll have to wait and see. Now they go on here to say that Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent made that clear over the weekend, saying that on Fox News that the administration, quote, needs legislation to distribute any such dividend. He said, quote, we will see, he added. Bessent also implied that the structure could take forms other than a check. For instance, a tax rebate, signaling uncertainty inside the administration about what Trump's proposal even is. So yes, Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, did come out and say that we may not have a stimulus check of $2,000 directly, but instead, come tax season, you might actually be saving $2,000 on your taxes because of the no tax on tips, because of the no tax on overtime, and also the extra rebate, the $6,000 deduction for individuals receiving Social Security and double that at $12,000 for couples receiving Social Security. Because of those tax rebates, you might see savings of $2,000 or even more than that. Well, that wouldn't really exactly be the same thing, because Americans might be expecting $2,000, not to be saving $2,000 on their taxes. And they also mention here that the math is another obstacle. So a $2,000 per person dividend, even if limited to Americans with low or middle incomes, would cost well over the $200 billion that Trump's tariffs have brought in if the checks resemble the COVID-era stimulus structure, which went to adults and children alike. The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget estimates the price tag could reach $600 billion, which would be 3 times the amount of what they have brought in so far. That would mean that Trump's tariffs would be a net $400 billion negative for the U.S. in 2026 based on current projections. Now, another thing to keep in mind is that they might actually be basing these checks on future revenue brought in from the tariffs. So even though right now we've only brought in $200 billion, in the future you would think we'd be bringing in even more. So we might have enough to be able to pay everyone, including dependents, the full $2,000 that they're talking about. And they also say that in the future of that revenue in itself is uncertain, so the Supreme Court is expected to rule within months on whether Trump exceeded his authority when he imposed sweeping tariffs by invoking national emergency powers. So far, both conservative and liberal Supreme Court justices have seemed skeptical of his arguments. If the court rules against him, the administration may have to somehow refund billions in collected duties to importers, which would have the opposite of Trump's promised dividend. Trump argues these stakes are existential, claiming a loss could cost the U.S. $3 trillion in refunds and lost investments. So again, a lot is on the line here. The Supreme Court might strike down these tariffs altogether, and they might actually rule on this before the end of this year in 2025. If not by the end of this year, they should be ruling early on next year in 2026. And of course, if they strike this down, then $2,000 checks are pretty much completely out the window. It's not going to be happening. If they back Trump and say that they are okay, that Trump doing the tariffs was okay, and they back it and they say that they're not going to strike them down, then $2,000 checks are certainly something that could happen. But another obstacle in their way, of course, are Democrats, because just for Republicans, even though it'd be very huge and important for Republicans to get $2,000 checks to Americans right before the midterm elections, that would obviously weigh in favor of the Republican Party come the midterm elections. At the same time, of course, Democrats do not want these checks to go out right before the midterm elections. So Democrats are more than likely to oppose any bill that would include $2,000 checks with Trump's name on them right before the midterm elections. So that leaves, the question, how exactly is Trump and the Republican Party going to get these $2,000 checks into the pockets of Americans with Democrat opposition? Because in the Senate, they are going to need at least 60 votes to avoid the filibuster from kicking in. So how exactly are they going to get this done? I actually asked ChatGPT, what are President Donald Trump's options to get $2,000 stimulus checks to Americans from the tariff revenue if Democrats are not willing to support the bill and therefore is only able to garner Republican support? It's a great question. Short answer is very limited. Trump's ability to unilaterally send $2,000 checks funded by tariff revenue is constrained, and doing it without bipartisan congressional support would be legally and politically difficult. Here are the main hurdles and possible options plus realistic risks. So the first option, of course, is to pass a Republican-led bill. So Trump would need to work with GOP lawmakers to draft a bill that authorizes a tariff dividend or rebate. This bill could propose a refundable tax credit tied to tariff revenue as a mechanism to deliver money. So for example, Senator Josh Hawley has already proposed a rebate, the American Worker Rebate Act, which would send $600 or more depending on revenue to individuals. And if passed, Trump could sign it into law without Democratic votes, assuming Republican controls both the House as well as the Senate. This would actually be a reconciliation bill, just like the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. So Republicans would be able to pass such a bill without a single vote from Democrats. This is obviously going to be their best chance of actually getting this done if Trump can gain the support from pretty much all Republicans. They can't afford to lose any Republican votes with a narrow House majority and a narrow Senate majority. Now, the second option would be to include the dividend in a broader budget package. So he might try to bundle this dividend into a broader spending or budget deal. For instance, in a continuing resolution or spending bill. Using reconciliation is difficult because reconciliation has strict rules. So it might be hard to do this by reconciliation. The third way is to use tax cuts instead of direct checks. So Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has indicated the $2,000 dividend might actually come in the form of tax cuts, not as literal checks. So for example, reducing Social Security tax, removing taxes on overtime, or giving deductions on things such as auto loans. This could be more feasible because tax policy is easier to change, at least compared to creating a brand new payment program, and could be done through a tax reform bill or reconciliation. Again, this is something that most Americans would probably rather not have because receiving like a tax rebate of $2,000 is not going to be the same to most Americans as receiving a $2,000 check directly deposited into their bank account. Now, the fourth way is to leverage political pressure, and the fifth way is via executive order. But more than likely, any executive order, including a $2,000 direct payment, will be struck down by the Supreme Court. So more than likely, this would not be a legal option for the Trump administration. Again, their best option here, if they are not able to garner any Democratic support on this idea, would be to do a reconciliation bill, pass it with only Republican support. But we'll have to wait and see what happens. With that said, leave your thoughts and comments below. What do you think is personally going to happen? Do you think that Trump is going to get this done? The $2,000 checks, do you think he's not going to get it done? Leave your thoughts and comments below. But that's all we have for today's video, and I will see you in the next one.